So now we are live with Leigh Cuen, who is a journalist and writer from CoinDesk, and we will discussing about her work in Bitcoin and how she get involved in this industry. Also, I want to let you know that we are in a media partner with CriptoNoticias.com that have made possible this convo, and also they are a really great source of news in Spanish, so that you know Satoshi in Venezuela is a project that is mainly in Spanish, but we are trying to connect with English speaker community. So today we will chatting with Leigh about her career and some topics that she covered in this time that she have been involved in this industry. And thank you very much for being here, Leigh. It's a really great pleasure to have you. And well, let's begin asking you about how do you get involved in this crypto journalist, and if you can tell us a little about those first histories that you made when you was a rookie journal. And thanks again.
Yeah, thanks so much for having me. I got into this space in a really lucky way, kind of by chance. My first stories that were assigned about cryptocurrency were in 2015 about people using Bitcoin to buy drugs in the black market. And then again in 2017 about the token boom. These were assignments by two totally different publications that were more mainstream. They weren't primarily crypto focused. And I'll never forget my first Ethereum article because I was so confused. I talked to several people and they said so many things that I had no idea what they meant by these software terms. So it definitely took me, I would even say a few years to feel really comfortable with some of the terminology and the concepts that we talk about in this space. But I was really lucky to meet some incredible people and I was keen to learn more.
Okay, and what was exactly the topic back in that first history? You were talking about Ethereum, but about what exactly, if we can know?
Oh yeah, so my first article was what is Ethereum? I was supposed to write that in just a few hundred words and a few hours. And but that's exactly what I found so interesting and curious about the space is such a basic concept. Like if someone assigns me to write what is Jerusalem or what is Microsoft, I could do that. I really struggled to describe what is Ethereum. And now, years later, I feel I can do that relatively well. But it was just the challenge of that concept of like defining the nouns and verbs that I found really interesting and difficult to fact check, which means it can be a good beat in terms of expertise.
Yes, we have a kind of language and that we need to understand to explain some things, but when you learn about the concepts that you are talking about, maybe you can use a more understandable language. So the experience is really important. And so that you have a couple years working in this space, working focused in Bitcoin and crypto related journalist. So what will be those advice that you can give to someone that is beginning their career, maybe because the halving, or maybe because there are new media outlets, but what will be that advice for Leigh to a new crypto journal?
So my advice would be to be what we call in Hebrew Rosh Gadol. Rosh Gadol means big head. Someone who is Rosh Gadol sees a solution to a problem and thoughtfully just does it without waiting for permission or formalities. Someone who's being Rosh Gadol is thinking of the big picture and not just what is in front of them. There's a lot of opportunity in the space for people who take initiative, but not a lot of traditional paths that are clear to follow. So my advice is to be observant and creative and take the initiative to take advantage of opportunities when they present themselves to you.
Yes, because maybe we can feel like we can talk about these topics because we don't know enough, but we are kind of interpreters, if we can see like that, that we need to understand these concepts, this technology, how it works or how it could evolve, and then we need to explain that in a good way that it's understandable for others that are not in crypto in that way. So I think that I can understand that my work is similar.
I think
So
so
yeah.
too. You're pretty sharp to realize that there's translation work that needs to be done, not just from Spanish to English, but also from tech concepts to finance or tech concepts to retail users, like whoever your audience is, you're translating for them descriptions of the value.
And this is a topic that we discussed with Diana Aguilar. I think that you know her. And yes, that was her main idea, that we are in a kind of view translating these concepts, these ideas, these complex things about Byzantine and stuffs and smart contracts and Bitcoin and the store of value and stuff like that, like people don't really think deeply about those things. So maybe the translation is difficult because of that. And as a specialized reporter that you work in a media outlet that is focused in the crypto space, you have to deal with a special kind of audience. I mean, Bitcoiners, Etherheads, and stuff. And obviously, there are things that will be very particular from these people that reads or listen to your work. And Leigh uh, writes and also hosts some of the episodes of CoinDesk podcast, so you can also listen to her work. And what are the kind of reaction that you have? And I listened to a podcast where you were with Peter McCormack, where you said that you have some reaction that reminds you where you were working with other sources that are more polemic, and I want to know about that, and how are the reactions on your work, on the topics that you talk about, and if you find that there are I mean, some things that reminds you to these other groups. That if you can comment about that, will be great.
Yeah. So in my career so far, I've written for a variety of different beats, and I would say that crypto readers are a very unique breed. It's kind of like a marriage between doing community news, which would be comparable to when I worked at like a Jewish newspaper that covered the same local community for 100 years, combined with extremist communities like Gamergate. I think there's obviously some overlap between crypto and white nationalists and men's rights activists in North America and in Europe. That may actually be where we see the largest threat of Bitcoin being used for terror financing, although I've not seen any evidence of that yet, and it's still relatively small. There's certainly some overlap between those communities. But that being said, I also use Bitcoin and have many friends and respected colleagues that use Bitcoin. There are bankers that like Bitcoin, and there are financial analysts that like Bitcoin, and it's not only rogue people in their basements that like Gamergate, it's also professionals in a variety of fields. So there's no one type of crypto reader. you can just be sure that it's a very insular community that will be very vocal and very reactive to news about this thing that they're so passionate about.
And why do you think that they are so passionate about the news? Because I can understand that someone can be passionate about the technology, about knows new things and explore opportunities, but why passionate and angry against journalists? Is this only because it's a crypto journalist related piece, or is because crypto people and Bitcoiners are, I think that they don't really believe in media. I think that this is a problem that we don't really see here in Venezuela, but I think that in USA they really don't think that the media is doing a great work. So you think that the criticism is only because it's a crypto news thing that you do, or a media reaction generalized?
So I think there's actually a lot of factors at play here, but you said something that I found really interesting. So if you don't mind, I want to ask you a question really quick. In Venezuela, you know that there's a lot of government propaganda in the media. Why is it that you think Venezuelans aren't as concerned about the concept of fake news as Americans are? Do you think it's because they already understand that news could be fake, or what do you think is going on with that?
I think that as many people recognize that those media outlets are only propaganda outlets, so you simply don't trust them. And as we don't have really free press because we have some kind of radio station, we have some media outlets online, but they get blocked and blah blah. So we don't really have a free press as we can talk as a concept. I mean, and nor in practice, obviously. And maybe it's because of that, because of people knows that we don't have that, but we have a lot of propaganda. Is that why? Because we understand. See,
Yeah.
I mean, I think that as we can recognize that is simply propaganda, and many of the outlets and many of the journalists that stay in the country are doing that because fighting against the propaganda or doing an opposition propaganda. So the journalism concept is really, I think that we don't have a professional journalism like an institutional, uh, yeah, um, little cases of people that are doing really hard work, but as I said, they get blocked, they could be jailed. So those are things that make people realize that information could be simply a tool, a tool to help the regime to keep in the power. So you think that in your case, that I don't know if you think that you live in a regime.
So
There are people that are saying that.
yeah,
So,
yeah.
so
But
do you
okay.
think that you can recognize this only because of crypto, or also because of media issues? So that is my question again.
Yeah, yeah. So I think there's a combination of issues going on, right? So first off, people get really upset when their expectations are violated in any topic, right? So a lot of people in North America and in the English-speaking audience aren't really familiar with the media they're consuming, what it is and what its intention is. So when it violates what they believe the intention is, which is to promote what they think is the truth, they get really upset. That on top of it, we're talking about money, And we're talking about a political movement that's quasi-religious. So it gets at the very core of who people are, what they believe, and their well-being, their financial security. So anything that calls any of that into question, even if it's just suggesting that it may not have been the smartest investment choice for them to do a certain thing, is going to immediately spark some kind of reaction.
Yes,
I'd be
yes,
curious.
and yeah.
I want to hear from you. You also write about crypto stuff, right? Do you notice that
Yes.
in Spanish, when you write about crypto stuff, if you criticize a project, are people equally outraged the way that you see English readers for my articles?
Yes, and when Peter McCormack were here, when he traveled to Venezuela, he interviewed me, and I get called cheat coiner, I get called maximalism, because people don't really want to be criticized, and Venezuela is a great narrative producer. So obviously, if you tell things that contradicts some of those narratives, people will get upset, and in the same way that English speakers does.
Yeah, so I think that maybe there's more of it in the US because we have that cultural conflict between the media and conservatives. We have the President of the United States saying things like the media are the enemy. But in general, all around the world, in different political contexts, you still have, when you talk about money and power, people are very reactive and very defensive. I think that's very normal for particularly writing about this topic. And then you have on top of it the whole cypherpunk culture. So people that are very used to anonymously participating in conversations where they might have less consequences in their real lives. All of these things combined make it probably the most volatile and harassment infused beat that I've ever seen.
Well, but you're still doing that as a. I mean that you're still
Yeah.
writing crypto, and why? What's that push you to keep writing about crypto? And yeah, I'm Leigh, and I will write the pieces that I want, and I will I will stay doing my job, but because it's that so. But why if we have this kind of audience, why still pushing this kind of news?
So it's a very selfish reason. And it's so funny to me how, like, when other people in the space, particularly men, we describe their businesses, Bitcoiners will try and moralize it, make it sound ethical to seek profit, right? Like, that is a capitalist ideal. If it's seeking profit, naturally the ethics will align and it will be a good activity. So I'm doing this activity because people pay me more for this beat than they pay me for other beats. And I can also do a higher quality of work and investigation. I could probably get the same amount of money doing something different, but the quality of work would be much lower than what I'm capable of doing here because I can do a lot of original research and I enjoy that kind of research. So really the only reason that I'm doing it is not because I want to spread Bitcoin adoption and together we'll walk and sing kumbaya in a rainbow world full of tokens, but like it's a job and it's a job I enjoy. So I'm going to keep doing it as long as it keeps paying me and I keep enjoying it. That's the answer.
Yes, a good answer. I think that I share the main idea of that, but I also want to spread adoption because the Bolivar worth nothing. So I think people will prefer to use Satoshis than Bolivar. So maybe I can help to do that. That's why Satoshi in Venezuela. I think that I'm more biased than you can be, but yeah, I know that you are a little selfish. Like I want to do original research, and I understand that because I want to do that too. But you used to talk about topics that other writers don't really touch. I saw comments of you saying that those pieces don't get the same engagement of others, but you still keep doing that, and I think that is an admirable thing. I don't know how to pronounce it, but I mean admirable. That is a good thing.
Gracias.
And and which is your mindset to talk about those topics like Iran, like sex workers using Bitcoin, like the porn industry? I mean, why to talk about these things in light of Bitcoin instead of other topics like the price or the markets?
I just don't think the price or the markets are very interesting. I think it's very interesting to figure out how people use this tool because they use it in a variety of different ways in so many different contexts, things I never would have imagined, things that I might have imagined, and it's cooler or more difficult in real life when you act them out. Like, I want to know if this thing that I'm reporting on is useful, and if so, how is it useful? I've been a journalist for nearly a decade. So long before I started covering crypto, I've been doing crypto for like 3 years. And in my previous reporting, I focused on Middle Eastern politics and Middle Eastern culture as well, and also the sex industry and pop culture and gender issues. So these are two topics that I already had an expertise in, and I just very naturally would look to see how Bitcoin fit into those contexts, because Bitcoin as a tool can be used anywhere, right? So all these places that I already had sources and had information about, I looked to see whether or not Bitcoin was useful there.
And do you find some connections in that, or can you talk about those connections that you find because you already wrote those pieces? And can you tell us how Bitcoin is useful in those kind of margins?
Yeah, so the most useful thing about Bitcoin is that it is censorship resistant money. People get really excited about a lot of tricks that can be done with programmable money, and that may be useful for other kinds of user groups. For marginalized user groups, censorship resistant money is the primary value, the primary use case. And it can be used in a lot of ways. It can be used for payments, it can be used for remittances, it can be used for savings, it can be used for investment. There's a variety of things that people do with money that can be really helpful to do across borders and not privately, pseudonymously and without permission. I've literally never heard of anyone from a marginalized group who did some kind of complex, I don't know, trade, although there are some who are traders. I do know some who have mined, for example, various refugees and sex workers as well. I know that have done some crypto mining, but for the most part, people are using it as money to transact or save.
And we are using it to save here because, as I said, the Bolivar worth nothing. But I think that I can understand this because as we like the government make the citizen like an enemy, so money is used to fight this enemy, so we can avoid the fight against the regime, or at least in that way, in the way of the money. There are other problems like bad services, bad wealth, and stuff. But I think that I can understand that Bitcoin is more money than technology, at least in situations like Venezuela. And I want to ask now something about Venezuela because as a crypto-related journalist, I think that you may be familiar with uh, Bitcoin and crypto narrative around Venezuela. You also made a piece about emerging markets, and you wrote about Latin America. Maybe you can comment us a little about how do you guys outside Venezuela look at us and this narrative? What are your comments on how is this opinion about Venezuela built?
Yeah, I've written several stories about Venezuela, and I find it very fascinating, and I love interviewing Venezuelans. They're usually extremely pragmatic, like sensible and helpful, just because this is money for you guys, and you're not trying to shill for the most part. It's very much about survival. From the outside, it looks like Venezuela is a failed state, like Afghanistan or Yemen, perhaps. It looks like it's the worst possible condition to live in. And so the people who are still there are extremely creative about the solutions that they find to these various challenges.
You know that Venezuelans are using Bitcoin in the same way that in those grade and margin markets. So it's it is more money than anything else. I think that though there are people that could be speculating and making trades and stuff like that, but uh, the main use case is to save money in a in a way. You in those pod that you host, you recorded one with Gladstein from Human Rights Foundation, and you talked a little about the connections between Bitcoin and the pros and contras of using Bitcoin if you are a human rights defender or activist. So can you comment us a little between these two topics? Because in Venezuela we need to fight for the human rights because we are fighting against a regime, and liberty, freedom, and those things could be causes to that will worth to fight, and maybe we can find these connections that you discussed useful. So please tell us a little about human rights and Bitcoin.
Well, Venezuela is such a unique case, right? Because you have your government who had the petro and is certainly crypto curious in terms of world leaders. And so we can see side by side how the peer-to-peer censorship resistance transactions are something that can be used to promote human rights, but also the concept itself, technology is just a tool, and it can be used for things that are definitely against human rights as well, like we've seen with the petro and some other examples in Venezuela. I think it's ridiculous for people to say that Bitcoin empowers people, just like you wouldn't say a hammer is empowering anyone just because you use it to build a house. It's a tool, and human rights is an imaginary idea we like to apply to things like fairness or freedom. Bitcoin can be used to promote ideas as we imagine them or against it. And how it's used is entirely dependent on the people using Bitcoin. It can be used to promote human rights, and it can also be used in other ways.
It could lead some people to be in danger because if you uh, put a public address to receive donations to finance a movement against the regime, I think that it will be a very dumb movement. So we need to understand that, as Lee said, it is a tool that could be helpful, but it will not help per se, like only because Bitcoin exists, we win the fight from the human rights. But let's talk about those, and let's talk a little about the Lee editor of texts. Like, you are a writer and also an editor that you uh, published a little quite ago this anthology with some pieces of cypherpunk women around the world. We had Emily Faria, that she had a piece in the anthology too. Can you comment us a little about the process of the pieces, how you decide to start this project, and how was the community reaction, and anything that you can comment about this great project will be amazing.
Awesome, thank you. Yeah, Emily's piece was great. I'm really lucky that I had the opportunity to volunteer on this open source project and learn a little bit more about what open source collaboration is like, even though I'm not a coder. We invited crypto users to share their perspective on this tool, and people from all around the world, more than 30 people, contributed. And it was really exciting to see from Venezuela to Iran to Japan how people are all interested in Bitcoin, but for different reasons, and contributing to the development of this technology in wildly different ways.
And can you comment a little on your own piece? You write about spending Bitcoin, that is a narrative that is kind demonized. I don't know why, but
It's very controversial.
yeah, spending Bitcoin. Tell us a little about why to write about that.
So I think everyone uses a tool for things that are useful for them, right? You in Venezuela, saving is a very useful function for you. For me, I have great access to banks and dollars, so I don't necessarily need Bitcoin for saving at least all of my wealth or the majority of the wealth. But I do find it very useful for transacting. I travel a lot, and I really like the idea of investing in skilled women by paying them what I think is the value of their work and their craft. And so Bitcoin is a way that all around the world I can directly pay skilled women, regardless of whether or not they have a bank account, and regardless of whether or not a male in their family manages the finances, for example. I can pay them directly, and I find that to be something that's really useful. For other people, Bitcoin might be really useful for time stamping or for trading. But for me personally, I think spending Bitcoin is a great way for me to get the value out of it. So I enjoy doing that and wrote an essay in defense of that.
So you don't have Saifeddin said low time preference.
I don't think that as I write in the piece, I think that it needs to be an incredibly unique opportunity in order to spend Bitcoin. If it's easier or cheaper or more convenient to spend fiat, then of course I will do that. That's the most useful tool for that situation. I don't own a lot of Bitcoin for starters, so I'm not talking about a massive amount of money. But for small amounts of money that to me might not be a big deal, but to someone somewhere else could be a very big deal, I think the value of that transaction, the professional relationship that can be established by showing I value their work that much, is worth the expense of having to just go back and buy more Bitcoin here in the US where that's easy for me.
Yes, and also this idea of the circular economy, that earn bitcoins instead of buying them, could be um, a little related to this idea of spending, because in some world places you will be able to spend and don't get hurted because of that, but in some other places you will be very grateful earning some sats instead of bolivars. I don't mean that it is happening in Venezuela, but I think that I get it. And also, outside Bitcoin, you write poetry, and that's a really interesting thing, because I know, I think, like two journalists that wrote poetry, but I want to know why, and since when are you writing these poems, and how was the experience with selling the book using Lightning Network?
Yeah, so I've been writing poetry since I was a child. That's actually the reason I became a reporter. I've gotten to interview some amazing poets throughout my career that I find really inspiring, and I don't think I would have had the same access if I had chosen a different career. Um, I'm not working on any poetry projects right now, although I do write throughout my entire life, just occasionally here and there. The poetry book that I sold using the Lightning Network was a really fun experiment. I'm really happy to say that I sold out, and I'm not sure if I ever really want to print more of those again because it's very personal work. But that's exactly the kind of thing where if you want to produce a product for someone that has value beyond the physical transaction itself, because Bitcoin is so precious, right? Like, how do you produce a product like that? And I think creating limited experiences that are very exclusive and very personal. I mean, these were literally love poems that I wrote. Um, can add a degree of value that is beyond the paper printed itself. And I was really lucky that people wanted to try this node with me and like was patient when I would send the receipts and like, have to check that we got the transaction all the way through. So this was like a fun experiment, and I would encourage anyone to try it.
Well, I will try it. I will write a book more related to Bitcoin, but I think that I will try to sell some using Lightning. This wasn't in the interview that I wrote to Lee. I sent my question in advance, but today we saw Peter Todd's case of harassment settlement, and Lee was the writer that reports from CoinDesk that history. And today we have a little drama in Twitter because we need drama in Twitter. I don't know why. So today the drama is about Lee as a reporter and her work. I think that if I were in your position, I was publishing the history. So I think that a year after we have other things to add, but in that moment the news was there. So if you can comment anything about that, because it's the today's drama and you are here, so
Yeah, I can comment in general about what it's like to report on cases like this and what it means, what it is you're looking at when you see an article like that. So for any news story, if you're not like an independent blogger or an independent creator, that story was assigned or approved by an editor and probably by multiple editors. So this is not as if like one person has it out for someone else and has an opinion they want to express and gets that up on the website. That's not how things work. And furthermore, with cases like this, there's a lot of legal risks around what you can and can't say. Probably there was a process of stringent and rigorous review for things that go up online. And of course, everyone who is involved is given the opportunity to comment and to have their perspective included in the piece. That does not mean that the piece will include in full, if everyone sends like long answers to questions, it still has a word limit. You have to get within a certain amount of words everybody's comments, and you have to get it in a way that the organization approves and stands behind. That's not an easy process at all. So the story that is up from a year ago went through a process like this, a journalistic process, and I am very proud of it, despite the fact that because it's about a sensitive subject, definitely people have strong feelings about it either way, especially with their own proximity to the subjects, right? Like if you're reading a story about your friend, it can be really hard to view that without emotion. And certainly, as somebody who's been involved in space for a long time, I know many of the people involved with this, and it was a very difficult piece to report. And I did not take it on lightly. And I was not, people think like, because our journalists were out for blood, promise you, I did not enjoy that process. I did it because I thought it had to be done properly, and I wanted to make sure it was done properly, so I did it myself. Along with the support of the institution that hired me to do so and decided that it was worth doing. That was definitely not something that I alone pioneered, and nor does the article represent my personal opinion on the matter. That is, it represents what the institution has published, CoinDesk. That being said, as you noted, the case is being settled, which means that as a reporter, probably we'll need to be doing more coverage on that, even if just to close out the case, you want to follow up on what happened. So people should probably stay tuned for that.
We have one question of the audience, but
yeah,
that is Jose Rafael Peña. We share some projects, and he's from CriptoNoticias, asking. So I mean, this introduction is for you to know that he may feel this sometime. How many times you was threatened by an enterprise or a startup because of an article, and what is the common reason of that threaten?
So I can't comment on how often I'm threatened by startups or groups in relation to an article. The fact that I can't say zero should maybe cause people to reflect and think about how they conduct themselves in the space. What I can say is that the common things that people say are that I acted in bad faith and deliberately wrote something incorrect. And I can promise you it's such a pain in the butt. There is no reason I would deliberately put something incorrect on the internet. I may, in some cases, not have the full information and update the article as promptly as I can. Every time I hear a complaint, even if people aren't necessarily asking for me to change something, it's just maybe part of the fact that I'm insecure. Like, I think about it really deeply. Like, did I come to this with a bias? Did the way I phrase this give the wrong impression? I really think and try and go through and even get other expert opinions anytime that someone comes up with that. But just the most common reason is that people assume because you're not expressing their opinion is because you are deliberately trying to hurt them, and that's the common reason that everyone claims.
Yeah, I feel you. I know that is the main reason. And let's close with a look on the future and from Leigh. And now let's imagine we are 10 years away from 2020. That is a really disgraceful year. So now we are 10 years older. So you think that Bitcoin is still here in these 10 years, and if there is any other crypto project around, and if you think that Bitcoin is still here, which was the path that lead us to this new present, or those things that make that the project failed, and now we have only Libra and Facebook? I don't know.
So Javier, exactly because of what we were just talking about, I want to preface this answer because it's such a dangerous question. People always want to turn to my personal opinions for signs of bias, as if as a journalist, it's not literally my job to write about perspectives, even if I disagree with them. So I want to preface this by saying it's my job to report what I see and what others think and what we can prove, regardless of what I personally think will happen to Bitcoin in any way. But with all that said, I think it is very likely that the software that we call Bitcoin will still exist and be used in some way by some people in 10 years from now. I think it's even likely that at least 3 blockchain projects, maybe more, in a decade from now, we'll still be seeing some kind of usage. It may not be censorship-resistant money, and it may not be the kinds of user groups that it has now, but I think somebody will be using the software for something in 10 years. If Bitcoin survives, it will be because it had a very robust open source culture and diverse infrastructure stakeholders that made it possible. I think the success that Bitcoin has already achieved is that it doesn't rely on BitMEX or Chaincode Labs or Blockstream or any other incumbent company to exist 10 years from now. There are enough people that care about it, and so it will probably maybe exist. Plus, people at organizations like Coinbase have raised a lot of money. So I don't think crypto is disappearing in the next decade, crypto beyond Bitcoin. As long as people still find it profitable to use crypto in some way, it will exist. How it's used, what it means, something I have no clue about.
I think that Bitcoin will be still around, and we will have a very long tail of shitcoins and stuff like that. But well, and we have two last questions of the audience. First is: have you ever been offered money to not write or report something?
That's a really good question. No, I have been offered money to write favorably about something instead of negatively, but never to just not write anything. I think people assume that whatever it is the project is like so important that I'm going to write about it. And I wouldn't even say that it's a very common thing to offer me money to report on something favorably, at least among the reputable and experienced professionals in the space. I'd say that's very rare.
And the last one is about the most difficult thing to cover in the crypto source.
Everything? Everything is hard. I think we're talking about technology that is not yet live or not yet widely used. It's really difficult to say whether or not it works and whether or not, because what people want is people want you to say, this is a great idea and a great investment, or this is not a great idea and great investment. And these are things that I can't say. I can say such and such people have invested so much money. I can say such and such people are using it for this thing, but whether it's a good idea to do those things, I have no idea. And it's really difficult when people want you to talk about new technology and they want you to report what they imagine will happen is the use case, when you're like, actually, no, there's 1,000 ways people could use this and we don't have any idea yet what it is.
Well, Leigh, this was a great conversation. Thanks a lot for your time and also for your thoughts, sharing your thoughts here. And really great to know that we feel something, some things that are similar, because the Spanish community is maybe angry and greedy as English speakers are. And thanks a lot. Where we can find your work and where we can find you in social media, if you can share that, will be great.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me. This was really fun. My articles, especially about crypto, are generally all on CoinDesk.com. A really fun cheat is if you just want to see like what I publish that week. I'm probably publishing every week. You can just Google my name plus CoinDesk and come up with my author page, like the page where only my articles are there. So that way, even if you missed it earlier on the homepage, you could see it there. I'm also on Twitter, which is LA__CUEN, so La Cuen. And on Instagram, I'm just my name, so Leigh Cuen. Yeah, that's where I'm at.
Well, thanks a lot for your time, and thanks a lot to the people that connects with us in this great conversation with Leigh. And that's it. Thanks for your time, and let's report many things